morning.
All right, let's talk about life expectancy because it is an interesting topic over the last couple of weeks and months, and it seems to be changing, and it seems to be depending on a lot of where you live and how you live and what you do when you live.
Yeah, so the group study came out looking at life expectancy across the country and found great variability. Areas in South Dakota, North Dakota, a little bit in Kentucky in the South, they don't live as long as others. And so makes you start wondering, is it where you live? Is it in the environment? Is it what you do? Is it the culture? Is it the genes?
Yeah.
And obviously most of us don't move that far from home, so people tend to be geographic. So there's a lot of factors, I think.
There was looking at the chart. There was an interesting chart where they had America in different colors, and green you lived longer, and in the western slope of Colorado was the most longest life expectancy. Here in St. Louis, it was St. Charles was clearly that sort of western St. Louis County, and then St. Charles County, and then south by the boot heel got a little brown or a little red, which right, and there were varying pockets, but it looked, generally speaking, rural, not as long as urban. On the coasts more, and on the south there was a lot of red, which was sort of less in terms of life expectancy.
Yeah. So certainly, if we look at if you wanted to superimpose, let's say, heart attack and stroke risks on these things, they sort of superimpose themselves really one on top of another. So from St. Louis down the Mississippi Delta south, St. Louis sort of starts pinkish and starts kind of in the heavy area, and the farther south you get in the Mississippi Delta, the more and more risk you have for dying of a heart attack or sudden cardiac death much sooner.
Right.
What's interesting also is that it's not like a year or two difference, but we're talking in some cases like 10 years difference.
So last week, today, I was in New Orleans, definitely down the Mississippi Delta. They eat a lot of seafood, meaning if you seafood, you eat it. And so when you think about culture, and they have very rich foods that are heavily fried. Remember, their most famous food down there is either crawfish or beignets, which are fried donuts.
Right.
I'm not sure that those qualify under the health food category. There's a lot of smoking as well. The other thing that's interesting in the superimposing of these maps is we've known for a long time, 20, 30 plus years, that folks in inner cities don't live as long. And zip codes matter. And zip codes matter in terms of zip codes comparing them with income. And so if you pick the zip codes that correlate with the lowest annual income per household, they will live shorter. There is no doubt. Some people have made the argument that this is access to care. Other people, I think, can make an equally strong argument to something we talked about a few weeks ago, which is availability of good foods. Fresh fruits and vegetables just aren't available to these folks at the same rate as maybe St. Charles, where they still have the actual local farmers that sell their fruits and vegetables on their stands.
There's also got to be personal responsibility, right? Because there's going to be two people who live right next to each other. One smokes, one eats fried food and eats steak, fatty steaks 10 times a week. And there's somebody else who runs, 6 times a week and never smokes and never drinks. They live right next to each other. One dies at 50, the other one dies at 90. So it isn't like there's like Flint, Michigan, where there's bad water and everyone dies because there's a terrible disease in that zip code.
Used to be that we could correlate those things a lot more closely. I think the trouble now is, the word multifactorial has to come in. So it's lifestyle, it's what you do or what you don't do, it's what's available to you, it's your genes. So when you start getting that many factors in there, I think a lot of people potentially throw up their hands and say, "Hey, there's nothing I can do about this."
Right.
And I think that would be the the most pessimistic or worst message I think we can get out of this study. Meaning, just because you live in one of these areas that might have a shorter life expectancy doesn't necessarily mean that has to happen to you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to move out of that area and go to Western Colorado to live longer. I think that we should be aware of the things that are kind of stacked up against us and the things that are in our favor.
Right.
And we should maximize what's in our favor.
Nobody should be shocked to find out that smoking causes cancer, and that if you smoke, you're gonna chances are you're gonna have a shorter life expectancy.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, you look at what you can control. Smoking, how much you drink, what you eat, how much you exercise, how much you keep track of your health. Those are opportunities that you have control over. And there is no such thing as perfect, but trying to control those and trying to take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of you, I think that's the message and what we want to try to do.
The other thing is that, and I don't know how much this study was sort of a nationwide study, but you keep reading, Doctor, in all sorts of articles the last couple of months and last few years or so, rural America is in serious trouble, whether it's the drugs or the lack of opportunity or the jobs, but rural America, their life expectancy is going in the opposite direction.
Yeah, so that's exactly opposite. So I did go to World War II Museum when I was down in New Orleans, and at the time, most people lived in rural areas and had to get to their main transportation hubs by train, and you lived a long time, you worked hard, and things have definitely changed. Certainly, the application of social media and that gets to rural areas, the widespread use and the resurgence of some bad drugs, the heroin epidemic we're dealing with right now. These things are not good, and they're not necessarily meaning that the inner cities are the worst of the worst, which I think did exist back in the 70s and maybe the 80s, but now it's kind of more widespread.
But the drugs, the alcohol, the suicide rates, are off the charts on some of these rural communities. It's just heartbreaking.
So nobody's immune, but I would go back to the concept of, we want to try to give ourselves our best opportunities and push it that way.
Dr. Michael Lim, you're the good ones. You're one of the good ones. Cardiologist with SLU Care and SSM Health SLU Hospital. What do you think of that World War II museum down there?
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
But it's crazy, too. So when you walk in, you got a movie, and you look at it, and they show a bunch of figures, and the final figure was 650 million. And that's how many people died worldwide during that conflict. And so, bringing that back to what we were talking about in terms of life expectancy and things, certainly you can't have a long life expectancy when 650 million people worldwide are taken in this conflict, whether you were a soldier or whether you're an innocent civilian, or certainly if you were one of the people that were sought out and discriminated against by some bad folks. So definitely gives you pause and gives you thanks that we live in the current era, for sure.
Dr. Michael Lim, yours welcome here. Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.
Doctor.
827, Big 5.